Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she pressed the cold compress against her swollen cheek. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger, a hollow-eyed woman with bruises blooming like dark flowers across her pale skin. This wasn't supposed to be her life. 3 years ago, she had walked down the aisle believing in forever, believing in the charming smile of Marcus Mitchell, the successful attorney who had swept her off her feet with expensive dinners and whispered promises. The first time he hit her, he cried afterward. He blamed the stress of a difficult case, swore it would never happen again, bought her diamond earrings as penance. Sarah had believed him because she wanted to believe. Because admitting the truth meant admitting she had made a catastrophic mistake. Because leaving felt impossible when he controlled the bank accounts, when he had systematically isolated her from friends and family, when he tracked her phone and questioned every minute she spent away from their upscale Denver home. Tonight had been worse than usual. Marcus had come home drunk, paranoid about a female colleague whose name appeared in his work emails. Sarah's explanations fell on deaf ears. His accusations escalated into rage, and rage into violence. She had locked herself in the bathroom while he pounded on the door, his threats echoing off the marble tiles. Eventually, his fury burned out, and she heard him stumble to bed. Standing in that bathroom at 2 a.m, something inside Sarah finally cracked wide open. Not her spirit, that had been breaking slowly for months, but rather her denial. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't survive another night, another week, another year of this suffocating terror. But where could she go? Her parents had passed away years ago. Her college friends had drifted away after Marcus convinced her they were jealous of their relationship. She had no money of her own, no job, no safety net. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Through blurred vision, she saw an email from her late grandmother's estate attorney. There were final documents to sign regarding a property Sarah had inherited, a small cabin on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Her grandmother, who had been 1/4 Lakota, had maintained ties to the reservation throughout her life. Sarah had only visited once as a child, barely remembering the vast prairies and distant mountains. The cabin. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was somewhere Marcus didn't know about, somewhere he couldn't find her. The attorney's email mentioned the property was remote but habitable. Sarah's heart began to race with something that felt dangerously like hope. She didn't overthink it. Overthinking gave fear time to take root. She grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and began stuffing it with clothes, moving quietly through the dark house. Her hands shook as she located her birth certificate, social security card, and the one credit card Marcus didn't know about, a card she'd opened years ago and never used. She took her grandmother's jewelry box, the only items of real sentimental value she owned. As dawn broke over the Denver skyline, Sarah sat in her car in a grocery store parking lot, having withdrawn $300 from an ATM using her secret card. She had left no note, no explanation. Let Marcus wonder. Let him rage into the void. She programmed the cabin's address into her phone, then turned off location services and blocked his number. The drive to South Dakota stretched before her like a promise and a threat. 8 hours across Colorado and into the plains. 8 hours to think about what she was doing, to second-guess everything, to imagine Marcus's fury when he woke to an empty house. But Sarah kept driving. She drove past her fear, past her doubt, past the part of herself that whispered she deserved what Marcus had done to her. The landscape transformed around her as miles disappeared beneath her wheels. Mountains gave way to endless prairie, and with each passing mile, Sarah felt the suffocating weight of her marriage begin to lift. She didn't know what waited for her on the reservation. She didn't know if she could survive on her own. But she knew with absolute certainty that staying would have killed her, if not in body, then in spirit. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the broken pieces, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she deserved better than this. The cabin materialized from the South Dakota prairie like a mirage. Sarah's car coughed and sputtered as she turned onto the dirt road, dust plumes rising behind her wheels. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grassland, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The structure itself was smaller than she remembered from childhood, a weathered wooden building with a sagging porch and windows that stared like tired eyes at the vast emptiness surrounding it. Sarah cut the engine and sat in sudden silence. The quiet was absolute, broken only by wind whispering through prairie grass. In Denver, there had always been noise, traffic, neighbors, Marcus's voice cutting through rooms like a blade. This silence felt alien and somehow holy. She stepped out of the car, her legs stiff from hours of driving, and nearly collapsed. Exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She hadn't slept, had barely eaten, and the adrenaline that had fueled her escape was finally draining away. The cabin key, provided by the estate attorney, turned reluctantly in the rusted lock. The door opened with a groan of protest. Inside smelled of dust and time, but the space was cleaner than she expected. Someone had maintained it, at least minimally. There was a wood stove, a small kitchenette with a pump sink, a table with 2 chairs, and a bedroom barely large enough for the iron-framed bed that occupied it. No electricity, no running water, no internet. Sarah wanted to laugh at the absurdity. She had escaped one prison only to arrive at what felt like another. She brought her duffel bag inside and collapsed on the bed. Despite the thin mattress and musty quilts, sleep claimed her immediately. She dreamed of Marcus hunting her across endless plains, his rage a storm on the horizon. She woke gasping in darkness, disoriented and terrified, before remembering where she was. Through the window, stars blazed in impossible numbers across a sky unpolluted by city lights. The next morning brought harsh reality. Sarah had no idea how to live like this. The pump sink required priming. The wood stove remained stubbornly cold despite her attempts to light it. She had brought some food from Denver, granola bars, crackers, bottled water, but those supplies wouldn't last. She needed help, but the thought of asking strangers made her stomach clench with anxiety. Marcus had taught her that asking for help was weakness, that showing vulnerability invited exploitation. She was trying unsuccessfully to start a fire when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Panic flooded her system. Had Marcus found her already? She grabbed a kitchen knife with shaking hands and peered through the dusty window. A battered pickup truck pulled up outside, and a man stepped out. He was Native American, probably in his early 40s, with long dark hair pulled back and wearing jeans and a work shirt. His face carried the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, knife clutched uselessly in her trembling hand. A knock came at the door. Firm but not aggressive. "Huh? I'm John Whitebird. I'm the one who's been looking after this place for your grandmother." His voice carried through the thin walls, calm and patient. "The attorney let me know you'd be arriving. Thought you might need some help getting settled." Sarah's mind raced. Was this legitimate? Or had Marcus somehow orchestrated this? But how could he? She hadn't told anyone where she was going. She had barely known herself until yesterday. Still, she couldn't bring herself to open the door. "I'm fine," she called out, hating how thin and frightened her voice sounded. "Thank you, but I don't need anything." Silence followed. She thought he might leave, but instead his voice came again. "Your grandmother was a good woman. Respected on the reservation. She asked me to watch over this place when she got sick. I gave her my word." Another pause. "There's wood for the stove on the porch. Food supplies in the box by the door. If you need anything, I live about 2 miles east. Follow the dirt road toward the sunrise." Sarah heard his footsteps retreat, heard the truck engine start. She rushed to the window and watched him drive away, dust trailing behind like a question mark. Only when he disappeared did she open the door. Sure enough, there was a cord of split firewood stacked neatly on the porch, and a large wooden box containing canned goods, dried beans, rice, coffee, and other staples. Taz came then, hot and unexpected. This stranger had shown her more kindness in 5 minutes than Marcus had shown in years. She carried the supplies inside, piece by piece, and this time managed to get a fire started in the stove using the dry kindling. As warmth began to fill the small cabin, Sarah sat at the table and let herself cry, not from fear or pain, but from something more complicated. Relief, maybe. Or the first fragile stirring of hope. 2 weeks passed in painful solitude. Sarah learned to work the pump sink, to keep the fire burning, to ration her supplies. She spent long days doing nothing but sitting on the porch, watching the prairie transform under changing light. The emptiness both terrified and soothed her. Sometimes she caught herself listening for Marcus's footsteps, for his angry voice, and her whole body would tense before she remembered she was safe. Or as safe as anyone could be in this isolated place. The bruises on her face faded from purple to yellow to gone. But the invisible wounds remained raw. She startled at every sound. She dreamed of violence. She woke certain that Marcus stood over her bed, only to find herself alone in the dark. The isolation she had craved now felt crushing. Days went by without speaking to another human being. She began talking to herself just to hear a voice. On the 15th day, she walked to the main road. It wasn't much, just a paved 2-lane highway that cut through the reservation. She stood there watching occasional cars pass, working up courage for what came next. She needed supplies. More than that, she needed to start learning how to live again. Hiding in the cabin felt safe, but safety that required complete isolation wasn't freedom. It was just a different kind of prison. The small trading post was 3 miles down the highway. Sarah walked it, grateful for the exercise after weeks of confinement. The store was a low building with faded paint and a sign advertising gas, groceries, and fishing supplies. She pushed through the door, and a bell chimed her arrival. An elderly native woman behind the counter looked up from a magazine, her weathered face creasing into a smile. "You must be Sarah," the woman said. Sarah froze, fear flooding back. How did this stranger know her name? The woman must have seen the panic on her face because she quickly added, "John Whitebird mentioned you were staying in your grandmother's cabin. I'm Martha Redcloud. I knew your grandmother well. She was a good friend." Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly. She managed a small smile. "Nice to meet you." Her voice came out rough from disuse. Martha's sharp eyes took in everything: Sarah's too-thin frame, her haunted expression, the way she positioned herself near the door like an animal ready to bolt. "You settling in okay out there? It's pretty isolated for someone not used to reservation life." "I'm managing," Sarah said, moving deeper into the store. She gathered basic supplies: more canned goods, batteries, soap, a notebook and pens. At the counter, she counted out cash carefully, hyper-aware of her dwindling funds. She needed to figure out how to make money, but the thought of job hunting, of being around people, made her chest tighten with anxiety. "There's a community dinner this Friday at the tribal center," Martha said as she bagged the groceries. "Nothing fancy. Just people getting together, sharing food and stories. You'd be welcome." Sarah's immediate instinct was to refuse. But something in Martha's kind eyes made her pause. When had she last eaten a meal with other people? When had she last felt part of a community instead of isolated and afraid? "Maybe," she heard herself say. "Thank you." Walking back to the cabin, supplies weighing down her backpack, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The walls she had built around herself since arriving, walls meant to protect but that also imprisoned, had developed a small crack. It scared her. But it also felt necessary. That Friday, as the sun began its descent, Sarah stood on her porch debating whether to go to the community dinner. Her instinct screamed to stay hidden, to stay safe. But another voice, quieter and deeper, whispered that she couldn't heal in isolation. Healing required connection, required risking hurt again. With trembling hands, she changed into clean clothes and began the walk to the tribal center. The building glowed with warm light and hummed with conversation. Sarah stood outside for 5 full minutes before forcing herself through the door. The large room was filled with tables where families sat eating together, talking, laughing. Children ran between chairs. Elders sat in places of honor. The smell of fry bread and stew made her stomach growl. Martha spotted her immediately and waved her over. "Sarah. Come, sit with us." She gestured to a table where several women of various ages had gathered. They smiled at her, friendly but not intrusive. Sarah sat, her body rigid with tension. And then she saw him. John Whitebird stood near the serving table, talking with a group of men. He looked different tonight, relaxed, smiling, part of the community fabric. As if sensing her gaze, he turned and their eyes met across the room. He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement, and returned to his conversation. Throughout the meal, the women at her table included her in gentle conversation without demanding too much. They asked safe questions about the cabin, offered tips for living more comfortably, shared stories about her grandmother. Sarah spoke little, but she listened. And in listening, in being present among these strangers who showed her simple kindness, something in her chest began to loosen. After dinner, as people mingled, John approached her table. "How are you managing out there?" he asked simply. "Better," Sarah said. Then, gathering courage, "Thank you for the supplies. For looking after the place." "Your grandmother earned that and more," he replied. "She helped a lot of people on this reservation. We don't forget debts like that." He paused, studying her face with eyes that seemed to see too much. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." That night, walking back to her cabin under a ceiling of stars, Sarah realized she had survived an entire evening without thinking about Marcus, without fear clawing at her throat. It was a small victory, but it was hers. The healing had begun. Spring arrived on the reservation like a promise kept. The prairie transformed into a sea of wildflowers, and Sarah began to transform with it. She took on small jobs around the community, cleaning the tribal center, helping at the trading post, assisting elderly residents with household repairs she learned to do through trial and error. The work paid little, but it gave her purpose and slowly rebuilt her connection to other people. John Whitebird appeared in her life with increasing frequency, though never intrusively. He taught her to properly maintain the wood stove, to identify edible plants on the prairie, to recognize the signs of changing weather. He was patient with her silences, never pushing her to share more than she was ready to give. She learned he was more than just a helpful neighbor, he was a respected leader on the reservation, serving on the tribal council and acting as an informal chief for his community. One afternoon, Sarah was struggling to repair a section of her porch when John's truck appeared. He stepped out carrying tools and lumber. "Thought you could use some help," he said simply. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, sawing and hammering. Sarah found herself relaxing in his presence in a way she hadn't relaxed around a man in years. John didn't demand conversation or attention. He simply existed alongside her, solid and calm as a mountain. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they took a break, sitting on the newly repaired porch with glasses of water. "Of course. Why have you been so kind to me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." John was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant on the prairie horizon. "Your grandmother saved my daughter's life," he finally said. 8 years ago, my daughter Emma got very sick. Pneumonia. The clinic on the reservation didn't have the resources to treat her properly. Your grandmother paid for her to go to a hospital in Rapid City, stayed with us the whole time, made sure Emma got the best care. She never asked for anything in return. Sarah's eyes widened. She had known her grandmother was generous, but this story revealed depths she hadn't understood. "Emma's grown now, studying at college to become a nurse," John continued. "She wants to come back and help people on the reservation the way your grandmother helped her. So when the attorney contacted me, told me you'd be coming, I made a promise to look after you the way your grandmother looked after my family." "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I didn't know." "Nothing to apologize for," John said gently. "But I've been watching you these past months, Sarah. I've seen how you flinch when someone approaches too quickly. How you keep your back to walls. How you check over your shoulder constantly." His voice was calm, non-judgmental. "You're running from something. Or someone." Sarah's chest tightened. She hadn't talked about Marcus to anyone. The shame felt too heavy, the fear too real. "I don't want to talk about it." "That's okay," John said. "But I want to tell you something. In Lakota tradition, we have a concept called Lakota. It means peace, harmony, and unity. But you can't achieve Lakota with others until you achieve it within yourself. And you can't achieve it within yourself while carrying wounds that haven't healed." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "I don't know how to heal from this. I don't even know where to start." John stood and extended his hand to help her up. "Come with me. There's someone I want you to meet." They drove in his truck across the reservation to a small house where an ancient woman sat on the porch, her face creased with a lifetime of wisdom. John introduced her as Grandmother Josephine, a traditional healer and keeper of stories. The old woman's eyes were sharp despite her age, and they seemed to look straight through Sarah's defenses. "This one carries heavy stones," Grandmother Josephine said to John in English, though Sarah suspected she usually spoke Lakota. "Sit, child," she said to Sarah, gesturing to a chair beside her. Sarah sat, feeling suddenly like a small girl before an all-knowing elder. Grandmother Josephine didn't ask questions. Instead, she told stories. She spoke of the Lakota people's history of enduring impossible hardships, forced relocations, broken treaties, massacres, cultural erasure. She spoke of how trauma could be passed down through generations, but so could healing. She spoke of the importance of ceremony, of connection to the earth, of allowing the past to teach rather than torment. "You think you are broken," the old woman finally said, turning her full attention to Sarah. "But broken things can be mended. In Japan, they have a practice called kintsugi. They repair broken pottery with gold, making it more beautiful than it was before. The cracks become part of the art. Your cracks, child, can be filled with gold too. But first you must stop hiding them." Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I'm afraid." "Of course you are. Fear is natural. But fear that controls you becomes a prison. You've already escaped one prison. Don't build another in your mind." That evening, sitting in the gathering darkness, Sarah finally spoke. She told them about Marcus, about the years of abuse, about her escape. John and Grandmother Josephine listened without judgment, without interruption. When she finished, emptied of words and tears, she felt simultaneously exhausted and lighter than she had in years. "The man who hurt you taught you that you were powerless," Grandmother Josephine said. "But you proved him wrong the day you left. Every day you survive, you prove him wrong again. Now you must learn to do more than survive. You must learn to live. Summer bloomed across the reservation, and with it, Sarah bloomed too. Under Grandmother Josephine's guidance, she participated in traditional healing ceremonies. She learned about sage smudging, about prayer ties, about the significance of the 4 directions. John taught her Lakota words and phrases, taught her to ride horses across the open prairie, taught her that strength could be gentle and masculinity could exist without violence. The nightmares came less frequently now. When they did come, Sarah had tools to manage them. She wrote in her journal, practiced breathing exercises Grandmother Josephine had taught her, reminded herself that Marcus belonged to her past, not her present. She had changed her phone number, consulted with a lawyer about divorce proceedings, begun the slow legal process of reclaiming her life. One afternoon, John invited her to attend a tribal council meeting where they were discussing preservation of traditional practices. Sarah sat in the back, watching John lead the discussion with quiet authority. He listened more than he spoke, built consensus rather than demanding compliance, honored every voice in the room. She realized she was seeing what leadership looked like when it wasn't rooted in domination and control. She was seeing what a good man looked like. After the meeting, they walked together along a creek that cut through the prairie. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah ventured. "Always," John replied. "Have you ever been married?" "I was. My wife died 6 years ago. Cancer." His voice carried old grief, well-worn and accepted. "Emma was just 12. It was the hardest thing we've ever gone through." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said. "Don't be. We had 15 beautiful years together. I carry her with me, but I don't let the grief define me. There's a difference between honoring the past and being trapped by it." He paused, then turned to face her. "Is that what you're asking? If I've moved on?" Sarah's cheeks flushed. She hadn't quite been asking that, but maybe she had. "I guess I'm trying to figure out if I can move on. If I'll ever be able to trust someone again. To be close to someone without fear." John's expression was gentle. "Healing isn't linear, Sarah. Some days will be harder than others. But I've watched you these past months. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You survived something that would have destroyed many people. And you're not just surviving anymore, you're building a life. That takes immense courage. I couldn't have done it without this community. Without you. We just reminded you of what was already inside you," John said. "The strength was always yours." As autumn arrived, Sarah realized she had been on the reservation for nearly 9 months. 9 months since her desperate escape from Denver. The divorce papers had been finalized. Marcus had contested nothing, perhaps realizing that any fight would expose his abuse to public scrutiny. Sarah had legally reclaimed her maiden name, Sarah Brennan. A new name for a new life. She had saved enough money to buy a used car, to make real improvements to the cabin. She had started taking online classes toward a degree in social work. She wanted to help other women who had experienced what she had experienced. She wanted to turn her pain into purpose. The relationship with John had deepened slowly, carefully, like a plant finding root in rocky soil. He never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel trapped. Instead, he showed her through consistent action what partnership could look like: mutual respect, shared decision-making, gentle affection freely given and received. When they finally kissed for the first time, under a November sky brilliant with stars, Sarah felt no fear. Only joy. On the anniversary of her arrival, the community threw a celebration. It was ostensibly for Sarah's birthday, but everyone knew it marked something more: her transformation, her integration into the community, her healing. Martha brought a cake. Grandmother Josephine offered a traditional blessing. Children from the reservation, whom Sarah had tutored, presented her with handmade cards. John stood before the assembled group and spoke in Lakota, then translated for Sarah. "We have a saying, Mitakuyo Yasin, all my relations. It means we are all connected, all part of the same family. Sarah came to us wounded and alone. But she had the courage to let us help her heal. In healing, she became family. In becoming family, she healed us too, reminding us of the power of community and compassion." Sarah looked around at these faces, faces that had been strangers less than a year ago but now represented home, safety, belonging. She thought about the woman who had arrived here broken and terrified, and she barely recognized her. That woman still existed within her, would always be part of her story. But she no longer defined her. In her speech, Sarah's voice was steady. "I came here thinking I was running away. But I was actually running toward something, toward healing, toward community, toward myself. A brutal marriage broke me, but it didn't destroy me. This place, these people, and especially John, helped me put the pieces back together. But I've learned that I wasn't being put back the way I was before. I was being rebuilt into someone stronger, someone who knows her worth, someone who understands that love should never hurt. That night, standing on her porch with John beside her, Sarah looked out at the prairie she now called home. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying stories of resilience and renewal. She had crossed through fire and emerged transformed. The scars remained, but like kintsugi, they had been filled with gold, with wisdom, with strength, with the knowledge that she deserved love that lifted rather than destroyed. She wasn't the same woman who had fled Denver in terror. She was someone better. Someone whole. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, when she thought about the future, she felt not fear but hope.